Let it be acknowledged that where we are today is located within the traditional homelands of the Marys River or Ampanafu Band of Kalapuya. Following the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855, Kalapua people were forcibly removed to reservations in Western Oregon. Today, living descendants of these people are part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. Today's event was to include Esther Stutzman, beginning in the traditional way. She is a very important elder of the people who live among us, but are still too often invisible. She is not here because she is caring for a loved one. Please hold her in your hearts. Many of you have been suffering in this past year and a half, caring for others, but also losing so many loved ones and in the past. We have reason to grieve, but in mourning, we feel the pain of the first people who lived here, losing this beautiful land where we are by their river. My relatives came to Oregon on the first Oregon wagon train and took their land. I was taught by Roberta Blackgoat, Orville Looking Horse, Robert Owens Graygrass, Perry H. Charlie, and Agnes Pilgrim that following Indigenous elders is essential at this time to repair wrongs and to learn what we must do to ban nuclear weapons and thus survive the climate crisis, creating justice and peace for future generations. Today, we want to bestow blessings to all people harmed by nuclear weapons, especially those here among us, like Pat Hoover, and especially Hiroshima survivors, Hideko Tamura Snyder, and June Ikuko Terasaka Moore and her family. It is with a heavy heart I share that June is too ill to join us. But we are here as a type of ceremony to send healing to those who suffer now and in the past due to war. And may it inspire new forces into action. Tonight, as in every moment, we are in a circle together with the past and the present to create a loving future. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Leah Bolger, and on behalf of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom Corvallis branch and the Linus Pauling chapter of Veterans for Peace, I say welcome and thank you for coming to our annual commemoration ceremony on the anniversary of the devastating attacks on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. I want to begin by thanking James Reismiller and Abundant Solar for providing our green power for this evening. James. I would like to recognize Kent Buys of Troubadour Music for loaning us all these chairs. And we are especially grateful to Masumi Timson, who came from Eugene to play the kota for us. I can say for certainty that her music was a highlight of 2019, and we're so glad to have you back again. As you all know, we were unable to have our commemoration last year due to the pandemic, and we are grateful that the conditions have improved enough so that we are able to have it this year. But we would still like to err on the side of caution and wear masks and try to distance as best as possible. We will now begin our program with some remarks from our own Mayor of Peace, the Honorable Biff Traber.
So here I am grinning and you can't see it. One of the tragedies of all of this. Yeah, it's my honor, as I've done in the past, to read the first, there we go, to read the peace declaration from the first of these events 74 years ago. Now, that is a long time, but we are still in the struggle or the work that kicked off. So Shinzu Hamai, president of the Hiroshima Peace Festival Association and mayor of Hiroshima City, had this proclamation or declaration on August 6, 1947. Today, on this second anniversary of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, we, Hiroshima's citizens, renew our commitment to the establishment of peace by celebrating a peace festival at this site and expressing our burning desire for peace. The citizens of Hiroshima will never be able to forget August 6, 1945. On that morning, exactly 2 years ago today, the first atomic bomb to be released on a city in the history of mankind fell on Hiroshima. It instantly reduced the city to ashes and claimed the precious lives of more than 100,000 of our fellow citizens. Hiroshima turned into a city of death and darkness. Yet, as some slight consolation for this horror, the dropping of the atomic bomb became a factor in the ending of the war and calling a halt to the fighting. In this sense, mankind must remember that August 6th was a day that brought a chance for world peace. This is the reason why we are now commemorating that day by solemnly inaugurating a festival of peace, despite the limitless sorrow in our minds. For only those who most bitterly experienced and came to know the most completely the misery and the guilt of war can utterly reject war as the most terrible kind of human suffering and ardently pursue peace. This horrible weapon brought about a revolution of thought, which has convinced us of the necessity and the value of eternal peace. That is to say, because of this atomic bomb, the people of the world have become aware that a global war in which atomic energy would be used would lead to the end of our civilization and extinction of mankind. This revolution in thinking ought to be the basis for an absolute peace and imply the birth of new life and a new world. We know that when in crisis, we can discover a new truth and a new path from the crisis itself by reflecting deeply and beginning afresh. If this is true, what we have to do at this moment is to strive with all our might towards peace, becoming forerunners of a new civilization. Let us join to sweep away from this earth the horror of war and to build a true peace. Let us join in renouncing war eternally and building a path and a plan for world peace on this earth. Here under this peace tower, we thus make a declaration of peace. So that was 74 years ago. And in the interim, we haven't had more horrors of atomic bombs, but we have continued to have wars. We've been somewhat optimistic as we talked about the Linus Pauling chapter. As Linus Pauling said in his 1962 Nobel Peace Prize, quote, "I believe that there will never again be a great world war due to the horror of these terrible weapons." So that was an optimistic, hopeful view, and that was in 1962. So here we are still today, striving. So I thought I'd go and look, and bear with me a minute, at the 75th anniversary of the bombing and the mayor's peace declaration from last year, from last August. And that was Mayor Kazumi Matsui, and he actually drew a parallel with 100 years ago. 100 years ago our time, and the parallel had to do with then there was a flu pandemic. And it was a flu pandemic that the world had to fight, but millions died because they couldn't deal with this threat to humanity together. They were fighting a war. Then after the war, there was a rise in nationalism that led to World War II and ultimately led to the bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then he goes on to point out, quote, "Humanity struggles now against a new threat, the novel coronavirus. However, with what we have learned from the tragedies of the past, we should be able to overcome this threat." And when he was quoting from a man who saw Hiroshima after it was bombed, the day after, as the 13-year-old, that man, quote, stated, quote, "Fighting happens when people think only of themselves or their own countries." So as Pope Francis said when he visited Hiroshima, to remember is a moral imperative. So the mayor said, we must never allow this painful past of fighting threats to humanity separately and fighting each other. Civil society must reject self-centered nationalism and unite against all threats. So as you look today, we're facing similar situations. So we must pull together. We must continue to work together against threats to humanity, like COVID, but even worse, like nuclear weapons, and prevent them from being used so that we have enough time to learn to truly live in peace and work together to deal with the things that threaten us all. So that was the inspiration I took from last year's 75th anniversary peace declaration, and I think we all need to think about it. I didn't do it justice, but we need to keep thinking of 100 years ago and what are we going to do today as we move forward and deal with both threats. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Traber. The Japanese term Hibakusha comes from the word hi, meaning suffer, baku, meaning explosion, and sha, meaning person. The Hibakusha who are still alive today were only children when their homes were decimated in 1945. The massive damage inflicted by those bombs has continued to cause suffering for 76 years now. Tonight, we would like to honor Corvallis resident and Hibakusha Jun Ikuko Terasaka Moore. Claire Nelson from the Oregon State University Peace and Justice Strategies Office will now read a statement written by June.
Hello, everybody. I hope everyone can hear me well. I will have to speak up. So I will be reading a passage from June, and it is called The Samurai Survivor of Hiroshima. I was privileged to be born in Hiroshima, Japan. My name is Ikuko Terasaka, which is both strong and a long history of samurai, which is the reason for my strength, tenacity, perseverance, gratitude, devout courage, and valiant nature. I was a young high school student during the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We were used to running to shelters as the bombings were frequent prior to the nuclear bombings. I remember the bombs were like fireworks, loud and many different colors of light emitted. The occupation of American soldiers, I was scared of these American soldiers, men with very large booming feet and loud voices. My sisters assured me not to be frightened anymore. The war was over. Japan surrendered. Both brothers perished as kamikaze pilots. My mother died about a year later from radiation exposure. The Japanese were going to work, shopping, school, and their skeletons remained as their skin melted off their bodies. These memories keep me from any hatred or victimization. I hate war, and I pray this type of weapon is never used again. I survived, married an extraordinary American soldier, husband, and father of my 4 children. He brought me to a new country, America, so different from Japan. My family completely disowned me, and I was forced to give up any connection to my family in Japan. In accordance, my husband's family also disowned us. I relied on my husband for desperate dependence. I attended night school to learn English and earned my American citizenship. We lived in Newport for a short time. I would go to the ocean and pray I could walk across the vast ocean back to Japan. I am now 93 years old and feel these and other events happened for a reason, and that the lessons learned should be for the greater benefit of all humanity. Japan and America are strong allies now. I say no wars, to make peace a top priority each day. Together, we can work on a conflict prevention, resolution, reconciliation, with respectful dialogue for addressing the root cause of conflict, violence, and our vast differences. May peace be upon and with you all. June Ikuko Terasaka Moore. Thank you very much.
So you are all invited to participate in a moment of conscious empathy together. We will do 3 movements. You may stand or you may stay seated. I invite you to stretch your arms and fingers wide. Invite your ancestors to be present and bear witness with us today. Take a deep breath of gratitude. Bring your hands to your umbilical and thank your ancestors for their gifts and their presence. Again, stretch your arms and fingers wide. Imagine you can touch the souls of all those connected by the creation and the explosion of atomic bombs. Breathe. We send compassion to the Diné and Pueblo people whose land, air, and water have been poisoned by the mining of uranium. And to the politicians and scientists whose fear led to the creation of such powerful destructive weapons, and to the military on all sides, we send our compassion. And to all who work for nonviolent conflict resolution, we add our love and compassion to their work. And today especially, we remember the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the 150,000 who died instantly, another 100,000 who died in the next 3 days, and the rest who died slowly from radiation poisoning, and the Hibakusha who survived, some who live today. Let's take a deep breath of compassion. Exhale and bring your hands to your heart. Feel the love that connects us all. You are a living conduit of that love. Breathe. For our final movement, I invite you to place your hands on your third eye or on your eyes. Imagine a world in which these weapons have been dismantled. Imagine a world in which life is in balance throughout the living ecosystem. We see that life is constantly evolving. People are evolving. Nothing is complete. We are doing our part consciously, empathetically. Take a deep breath of joyful hope. And now take your hands and release your vision outwards. Be at peace.
Our next speaker is Adrian Monty, who recently earned her master's degree in the OSU Environmental Arts and Humanities program, where she transcribed the oral histories of individuals harmed by radiation, from atomic veterans to Hanford Downwinders. Adrian.
Hello. Thank you for being with us at the first commemoration of Hiroshima and Nagasaki with the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Force. As of today, 55 countries belong to the TPNW. These countries, along with all of us, are creating new international to local norms to redefine what power and security really is. The treaty creates a new system of verification and cooperation to eliminate nuclear weapons among the countries that join the treaty. They each commit to creating the conditions for the entire elimination of nuclear weapons by nuclear weapon states. States that sign the treaty agree to important commitments, including being mindful of the unacceptable suffering of and harm caused to the victims of the use of nuclear weapons, the Hibakusha, as well as those affected by the testing of nuclear weapons, as we are doing today in solidarity with members of the treaty. This treaty represents a step towards repairing our relationships. It's a civil society intervention to disrupt the ecocidal international nuclear order. In the 90s, ecologist David Orr wrote about how our environmental crisis stems from our inability to think about the long-term effects of human actions. He was right then, and his words continue to ring true now. We must preserve our limited resources in order to survive the climate crisis and create justice for all people by meeting human needs instead of war. In Oregon, because of the coordination of Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility, we have passed both a state measure and Portland City resolution to align with the commitments of the treaty, including our Oregon resolution granting that there is a human right to not be threatened by nuclear war or nuclear contamination. We achieved the ratification of the UN treaty only because of the imagination and ongoing sacrifices of the Hibakusha, the survivors of nuclear war, who continue to speak their demand that nuclear war must never happen again. They suffer in reliving their memories to help people understand that we must act. As Dr. Martin Luther King said, we still have a choice today, nonviolent coexistence of violent co-annihilation. It's survivors' leadership, indigenous leaders, radiation-exposed communities like atomic veterans, and downwinders like Patricia Hoover that make clear why we need to rid the world of nuclear weapons. I heard many of these stories while I worked on my master's thesis through the Environmental Arts and Humanities program here at OSU. First-hand stories of the radiation exposed who have dedicated their lives to prevent what happened to them from happening to others. The current treaty provides in 2 articles specific to care and help for radiation-exposed communities. But right now in the US, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, or RECA, which provides a one-time compensation to people suffering from illnesses linked to radiation exposure, is due to expire next year in July 2022, unless action is taken by Congress. The current RECA bill still excludes many of those exposed to radiation, and several new bills are being introduced to extend it, but we will still need your support. For future nuclear weapons-free world type events and campaigns, please sign our petitions and jot down your email address over at the table we have with petitions. Additionally, make sure to support the Divest from War resolution. There's a sign up at the info table. Also, follow the trinitydownwinders.com web pages to support the modest effort to give care and small compensation to just some of the people unwittingly exposed in the many steps of creating nuclear weapons due to mining, milling, production, testing, and storage of nuclear weapons. This treaty is also due to the small actions of millions of others on our planet, people like you coming together to mourn, who understand we cannot have a future as long as our limited resources go into technology of killing instead of living and caring for one another. Thank you again for spending the time with us to acknowledge nuclear harms and our shared wish for healing.
We are now honored to hear the poem August 6th, read by Pat Hoover of Eugene, who herself was harmed by her exposure to radiation and other toxins growing up in the 1940s and 50s, downwind from Hanford Nuclear Reservation, where plutonium was produced for nuclear weapons. Pat.
Good evening. I'm so glad you're all here commemorating Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This poem is by a woman named Janice Mirikitani. She's a third-generation Japanese American born in California. She was imprisoned as an infant with her family in a Japanese internment camp in Arkansas during World War II. She currently lives in San Francisco. The poem is called August 6th. Yesterday, 1,000 cranes were flying. Hiroshima, your children still dying. And they said it saved many lives. The great white heat that shook flesh from bones, melted bone to dust, and they said it was merciful. Yesterday, 1,000 cranes were flying. Oba-chan offered omame to her radiant Buddha, incense smoking miniature mushrooms, her lips moving in prayer for the sister they found tattooed to the ground, a fleshless shadow on Hiroshima soil. And they said, Nagasaki. Yesterday, a woman bore a child with fingers growing from her neck, shoulder empty. And they said, the arms race. Today, 1,000 cranes are flying, and in expensive waiting rooms of Hiroshima, California, Oregon, our blood counts sucked by the white death, and they said it might happen again. Tonight, while everyone sleeps memoryless, the night wind flutters like 1,000 wings. How many ears will hear the whisper, Hiroshima, from a child's armless shoulder puckered like a kiss?
Our last speaker will be Reverend Matt Gordon of the First Christian Church, who will lead us in the community affirmation. If you don't have a copy of the program, raise your hand and we'll get you one, because the affirmation's on the back of it and you will need a copy of that. Reverend Gordon?
Thank you. Give people a few minutes if you don't have a... happy to be a part of this gathering tonight. This is important work that we're doing. I invite you to say this affirmation with me and take this home and keep it near. It's the good words that we share tonight. So we'll read this together. We who live in the shadow of the mushroom cloud, we whose very bones and lungs are threatened even now by radioactivity, today declare our hope in the future. From the diversity of our traditions, we have come to renew our belief in the holiness of the earth and the sanctity of all life. We declare we are at peace with all people of goodwill. We need no leader to define for us any enemy, nor to tell us what we need security for and defense against. Instead, we affirm that our security rests not in armaments, but in the justice of adequate housing and food, in the justice of meaningful education and food, in the justice of an economic order that gives everyone access to our earth's abundance, in the justice of human relationships nourished by cooperation, in the justice of safe, clean, renewable energy instead of the perils of nuclear power. We affirm people over property, community over privatization, respect for others regardless of gender, race, class, or sexual orientation. We choose struggle rather than indifference. We choose to be friends of the earth, of one another rather than exploiters. We choose to be citizens rather than subjects. We unite ourselves with sisters and brothers the world over to join together in communities of resistance, to the nuclear weapons threat. We unite ourselves with trust in the spirit of life. Justice and love can overcome the machines of destruction. Before us today are set life and death. We choose life, that we and our children may live. Let it be so. Thank you.
One of the most important things that I want to make sure everyone knows about is how hard all the people that are sitting here have also worked in your lives. I know that a lot of the people here are people who've been activists their whole lives working on all these issues. And we never really get a chance to stop and just thank you and acknowledge you and bless you and tell you we wouldn't be who we were if it weren't for you. And that's what I want to have everyone here understand. And the young people bring so much with their life. And to have young people with us and all the different ages today has been a precious gift from the Creator to me. I feel as though I've waited my whole life for this very day, for this very moment, when this crowd would come together. We would have these beautiful music, the beautiful music and the koto playing. We would have the poetry. We would have the sadness. And we would have the beauty of all of you. I walked across the country in 1986 for a global nuclear disarmament, and I don't believe I ever stopped walking until tonight. Because now I know you are here. Now I know I'm not alone. And I'm so grateful that you've all come. There's a lot of things going on around nuclear issues right now, and it's a really scary time. We all need to help each other learn and not feel like we have to be experts. We have to do our best and know that's good enough and just keep trying. Never give up. The Hibakusha have asked us to do this. They've asked us to also go to Japan, visit Hiroshima, visit Nagasaki, go to their peace museums, listen to their stories. There's many, many stories online right now. If you just Google Hibakusha and their stories, and there's so many people harmed at every step of the fuel chain. They need your love, and they need to know how you care. Think of them. Think of the uranium miners, the uranium millers, the people who are harmed with the production of nuclear weapons. Like today we have Pat with us. Don't forget her. Keep her in your heart. And of course, June and Hideko. One of the things I wanted to share with all of you is that we have a beautiful project because of Hideko Tamura Snyder, who is a Medford. She lives in Medford now, but she survived Hiroshima, and she has a beautiful book called One Sunny Day. She started a peace tree project. She also has a children's book. When a peace tree grows, when a peace tree grows. And Hideko decided that people would feel more, perhaps, for the survivors that were trees. And if they understood that there's these Hiroshima trees that are also descendants of the trees that survived Hiroshima, that it would heal everyone if they were planted. And at this point, there's been trees planted all over Oregon because of her project as an ambassador for the Peace Tree Project. And these are seeds that are gathered from the trees that survived the bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And now they're distributed to towns and public places to plant peace around the world. And we have quite a few in Corvallis. We just planted one at the Martin Luther King Park. And this is where we met June, Ikuko, Terasaka Moore. I'm going to tell you a quick story, but I don't know how much time I have left. Okay. The people planting the tree were the Oregon Forestry Department and with local Corvallis people. And there was an article about how this peace tree was going to be planted. And Linda Allen, June's daughter, saw the article. And so she called up the people in charge of planting the trees. And she said, could we have one of those trees? And they had to say, no. She said, well, I'm only asking because my mother survived Hiroshima, and I think she needs one of those trees. Well, they still couldn't give her the tree because they're only, the mission of the project, it's called the Green Legacy Project, Green Tree Legacy Project, is you can only plant the trees in a public place. You can't give them to a private yard. But June came to the planting at the Martin Luther King at the Martin Luther King Park. And I met her there, and I was just so excited to meet her and her beautiful family. And I thought, this family has so much resilience. This family has so much to offer us. And we didn't even know they were here. All these years when we've talked about these commemorations and talked about survivors, there was a survivor here who didn't know we were sending her our love. So now she knows, and she'll see eventually some of what we did today. And I took her to the Asian Pacific Cultural Center, where we planted a peace tree to honor Hideko Tamura Snyder, the very first tree she planted. Yeah, which OSU helped happen. And young people. Anyway, it's a persimmon tree, and persimmons have seeds. So we will raise the seed, and we will give the seeds to her family, and she will eventually have the peace tree that she knows she needs. So thank you, all of you.
Thank you so much. Linda has been working her whole life on the issue of nuclear weapons and nuclear harm, and she's very passionate, and we thank her for being such an advocate for the abolition and so sensitive to the issue. So now, everyone, you are invited to gather a candle, and we will slowly walk to the Van Buren Street Bridge and fan out across the bridge, where we will watch a flotilla. This year, I'm afraid it's not as big as it was in 2019, but there will be a number of kayaks and canoes with lanterns that will come up the river, and we'll see them come up. So, Masumi-san, can you play some more for us while we gather our candles? That would be lovely. Thank you so much.